Inside the Chamber is brought to you by presenting sponsor, Naperville Bank and Trust.
Welcome to Inside the Chamber. I'm Kaylin Risvold, President and CEO of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm new to the position, which leads us right into today's topic, change. I'm joined by Adam Russo, founder and CEO of the behavioral health group Edgewood Clinical Services, as well as Erin Kasch, Director of OEM Programs at Dealer Inspire. Thank you both for joining me today. And let's dive right in. Change. It sounds like such a scary word. Adam, why is that?
Change is funny, right? I mean, everyone talks about they don't like change, but I haven't met one person who lives a life that doesn't change. So it's funny how we really struggle as individuals. We crave security and predictability, but yet it never comes. So our mentality and attitudes around change, it's important to really think about being open and expecting it rather than try to hold the status quo for as long as possible, because the odds are it's just never going to happen.
So change isn't a bad word.
It's definitely going to happen one way, no matter how we slice it. And so being able to be open to it and receptive to it is only going to help us when we actually have to cope with the change that's eventually coming.
Yeah, and Erin at Dealer Inspire, I know there's a lot of change there that you're dealing with as well. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So prior to my role as Director of OEM Programs, I was actually Director of People Operations. And so Dealer Inspire has been through a growth period for the last 6 years, and that's about as long as I've been there, so no stranger to change. But we embrace that constant. We know that change is imminent in a growing company, and so we like to look at that as opportunity and really just kind of help our employees understand that maybe what you did today and how you did it today is going to look different tomorrow just by the nature of the business. So we try to be very upfront as we bring people on to make sure this is a culture of change and innovation. Innovation drives change. And so if that's something that you embrace in your life, you're going to be very successful at DI. And we try to just continue to nurture that mentality. Expect the expected, which is change.
Yeah. And do you think that if you tell them that ahead of time, that they fit in better at the culture?
Well, I think it definitely prepares them for what they're about to dive into. From a recruiting standpoint, we always like to make sure it's a good fit on both sides. If the candidate wants to work with us and we want to work with them, that's great, as long as they understand the culture and what needs to happen inside the organization on a daily basis. What we want to do is make sure everyone is eyes wide open. We know that some people are change adverse, or they prefer not to. And we're not opposed to hiring people that take a little bit longer to process change. We know they can be some of our greatest advocates once they're on board. We just want to make sure everyone is aware that what they see today in the company may not be true 3 months from now, just because of the growth.
And we run into the same things. Our number of our staff has almost tripled over the past probably 2.5 years. And so systems that used to work with 20 or 30 employees don't work with 120 employees. And so and so there's a constant evolution of how do you keep things efficient internally, and then on the flip side is when we just with number of providers and things that you're able to do, how can we be innovative? Working in the healthcare field, there's insurance bounds and there's these certain rules that you have to play by on one hand, but there's certainly a lot of room for innovation on the other. And so how do we get creative in trying to put together things that aren't typical? And I think especially in the behavioral health field, when all these behavioral health theories and all these things were created, it was 100 years ago. If behavioral health were created today, it wouldn't be created without technology. And so you're talking about how do you even undo some education or relearn or reformulate what people have learned over time, because we just weren't taught in some of these different different concepts. And so the idea of how do we perpetually change what we're doing overall to better deliver quality of care and get outside of even our training is a struggle at times.
So it's kind of like that saying of if you're not moving forwards, you're moving backwards.
It's exactly it, and it's so easy to get stuck. I mean, if you look at corporations over time, and you look at Fortune 500 companies from 30 years ago, how many of them are there today? And so much of it is because either a lack of innovation or a lack of an ability to change. And what's interesting about people is that we also like change just when we don't have to do it, right? I mean, like if you think about all the disruptors who developed cell phones and things like that, it was great that these people developed it, but if you were actually a part of that, it would feel uncomfortable comfortable to actually be a part of change. And so while we really like the benefits of change that happen, we just don't want to actually have to make the shift. And so we have that, I think, ambivalence as individuals with it.
That's an interesting point. And Erin, how do you see that, especially when you're dealing, people operations? That's such a cool title of. How do you support people as they're coming in and they may be change averse or they may be excited for change? How do you help support that and foster that?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, in the organization, we have 5 tenets: communicate, innovate, learn, be transparent, and give back. And so we're really trying to employ those 5, especially when we're going through change, and keeping an open line of communication, especially if someone's changing from one manager to another, making sure they have a discussion on here's what I need to be successful, or here's how you can be successful in the team. And just keeping that communication open, I think, is key, and helping understand why. We're really big on the why. We want to make sure our employees know if something is changing, why and how is it going to benefit them. Even if it's going to take a while to process, at least they can drive back to this is how it's going to be good for the organization, and this is how ultimately it will benefit me and my role and my growth opportunities. So just constant communication, I think, is key. I always like to think the 6th tenet that's hidden on the wall is flexibility, right? So being flexible, that's how some of our most successful employees have gotten by, is just being successful and open.
So for the business owner or the employee who's watching, what are some tips that you can give them on how to embrace change other than just have an open mind? Or is that really what you most need when you're talking about change?
Yeah, I mean, like what you were saying, I mean, it's so much of it is about the attitude, the premise of the attitude in the first place. If the premise of the attitude is I'm going to do what I want to do because this is what I do, you're going to run into a wall because eventually you're going to have to shift. If the attitude is we're always going to be constantly shifting, changing, evolving, flexing, and whether I'm working just as a solopreneur or I'm running a business, the reality is that the attitude that one is projecting is what everyone else is going to take in. So if a leader is kind of centered on this place of we're going to keep it this way because this is how we've always done it, everyone's going to hate change. If the attitude is we are always going to change, we're always looking for innovation. And the research says too that quantity of ideas that people throw out lead to quality of ideas. And so the fact that just because there's a lot of ideas out there doesn't necessarily mean everything has to shift on those ideas, but the constant generation of ideas actually leads to better ideas. And if a culture stifles that process, then it's really difficult for an organization to ultimately change in a good way.
Erin, what else do you see at Dealer Inspire, or even with your own change? You just changed positions. Of how were you able to kind of communicate that and embrace that?
Absolutely. I think just understanding my own why and my interest in changing a role and making sure Joe, our CEO, and the other executives in the organization understood why that was important for me, and just kind of digging in and educating myself on what is this new role and how can I take what I've learned here and apply it there. It's really been, for me, helpful to embrace the change because everything is a little bit different. Every day is different, but I thrive in that environment. I like to know how I can contribute differently or bring a different perspective to what's going on. I try to encourage the team to think that way too, is if you're experiencing something, there's an opportunity for you to share that with the team or help other people feel more comfortable. So really just kind of dig in, and I like the idea of quantity brings quality, because I think not just grabbing onto the first idea that comes out, but continuing to have that open culture of what else, and then taking a look at everything that was generated. I think that's a great way to approach change.
And being realistic. So I'm new at the chamber, and there's been a lot of change. We added a staff member, we're adding some new committees. There's a lot that's changing, and I think the thing that I've realized through change is how to be realistic about it. There's things that I want to update, and I might not get to it in 2020, and that's okay. And so embracing that, but at the same time realizing kind of what needs to have a fire and get done quickly. We just launched our diversity and inclusion committee, really exciting. That's an idea that I had, and now it's live, it's real. And so we're seeing a lot of change, and it's been great for me to have people embrace my change in leadership, my change in style, and kind of vision for the chamber. So I think change very much works both ways of I'm embracing the change and the staff is embracing the change, but the community is as well. And I think that's been really great, is having a welcoming community. And I feel like that's made my transition a little bit better, is having that mentality of change is constant.
Yeah, and it is, and I think the more that you can have, the buy-in, and especially the leadership around it. When a leader seems to embrace change, everyone else typically feels comfortable with it too. It's when people in leadership roles hate change that it gets to be a little bit harder. So that is, I think, the burden on leaders is to get comfortable with moving forward, because things are not going to stay stagnant.
And do you think, so if you're an employee who has a leader who is one of those leaders who doesn't necessarily embrace change, what can they do to help their own professional growth? Or if they're seeing change, do they have to change positions, or is there something they can do to help foster that in their own culture?
I'm a believer that anybody can be innovative, and so just because the leader isn't necessarily championing it, if somebody is an innovator, that they should continue to innovate, because if they continue to innovate, again, that quantity of idea will lead to quality, and I think eventually those ideas do get heard by the people who need to hear them. It just might not be in the way that the employee would like it to go. So, but I think it's fair to trust the process of the more ideas that can be put out, the better, the more it will get communicated organizationally, and the people who innovate in the end, I think, will be successful wherever they go.
Yeah, and again, change isn't immediate. It takes time. And is that something that you see, that it takes time for change sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. And if one method of trying to push change isn't working, try to find another way to it. Find some advocates inside your own organization that can help you champion that effort. And really just illustrate that why. If you've got a manager that's a little change adverse, here's why it could be beneficial for you in particular, but the organization at large. I think just continuing to embrace it and kind of push for it is a great way to get things done, and to motivate other people to think differently too.
And I think the hard part with change is that culturally we tend to value accuracy and precision. And the problem with change is that you can't ever really guarantee that the change is going to be accurate or precise. And so that's another reason why I think a lot of leaders get uncomfortable, because if they make a change, they want it to work. And I think it's getting comfortable with the fact that it just might not work. And just because it didn't work doesn't mean it failed.
Right.
You just learn something different to be able to move on to the next idea that's going to be better than the past one. And I think culturally, as we get stuck on this precision perspective, it makes it really hard because we feel like we have to be right that first time. But again, if quantity of ideas leads to better quality, the odds of getting the perfect idea the first time are very low. So that's where it's just important to be able to not look at it as success or failure, just as a step forward, and you never actually get to the end. And so looking at it as a process rather than having an end point, I think is helpful when looking at the whole view of it.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that quickly, as a manager or for managers, if they can embrace a culture of like failure is okay, or like failure leads to success, I think that helps employees embrace that and kind of champion that effort. If they're always concerned about what happens if I fail, or I said this was going to work and now it didn't, that stifles kind of the effort. But if a manager can say, hey, it didn't work, we tried it, didn't work, what else you got? I think that really helps people kind of keep that snowball going, keep those ideas rolling.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Quantity leads to good quality. I like that. That's great. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be right back.